Well, welcome to another edition of the Legends Community Show right here on the powervoices.com. I'm your host, Greg Bell, coming to you as always weekly, talking a lot of sports, a little bit of politics, a little bit of entertainment, a little bit of fun. Um Today, of course, we got to jump right on it because I got to admit, I am probably the worst bracketeer, like so many other people have been this year. Uh, how do you pick a bracket when you don't even know half the teams that are going to be in the finals? I mean, think about this. You know, let's take away the women's side of it for now because it's like I told you. All four of the women teams are the four number one seeded. It falls in the line. But man, did we ever look terrible with the brackets this year? I mean, I can't think of a year that the brackets were so obscure. I mean, just think about this. And I'm going to bring up one special thing, and that's going to be talking about Sister Jean. But just think about this bracket the way it sits today, guys. Loyola in the finals against Michigan. Villanova, number one seed against number one seed KU. You can see that. But no time in the history of the game, a University of Maryland, Baltimore upsets a number one University of Virginia. Virginia had been the number one team the entire year. And now look where we're sitting at. Way out of it, kind of contemplating what the hell went wrong. And you're looking at Loyola Chicago. Excuse me. Loyola Chicago, a typical medical school, but they got some gunners that can hit the 3 point like no one else. They're averaging somewhere around 72%. You know, I mean, they've had a phenomenal run. If you want to talk about a team that came out of nowhere, but they're not the only ones. I mean, who would have picked Nevada to make it down to the Elite Eight? Who was going to pick Kentucky to fall to Kansas State? I mean, we're talking about perennial powerhouses here. Nevada, number 7th seed, loses to the 11 Loyola Chicago, who no one knew where they came from, but they just know they just a group of Chicago kids who believe and they drank the purple juice. I mean, it's just been amazing. My brackets were screwed up ages ago. I mean, let's talk about how poorly my brackets were. I mean, I had Michigan State playing in the finals. Michigan State goes down, and this is one of those go downs that I can't even figure. Michigan State losing to number 11 Syracuse, a Syracuse team that really, for all intent and purposes, nobody even thought they should have been in the 64. But they got a play that one game playoff. They beat Arizona State 60-56. They move on. Then, of course, what do? They get TCU, the number 11 versus the number 6 TCU, and TCU gets their butt whipped. Then goes Michigan, gets their butt whipped. And then Syracuse actually came within 4 points of beating Duke. But how crazy is that? Did y'all see the Duke Kansas State game? Kansas University UK game? Whew, what a magical game that was. Goes into overtime. And I'll be honest, this kid Bagley could have taken the game over, but it was the Carter kid who really came to aid. I mean, Bagley, a first team All American. This is the first year, just to throw that out to you guys. First year, 3 freshmen, first team All American. Anton over at Arizona, and of course, Trae Young over at Oklahoma. 3 freshmen, first team All Americans. Anton probably will walk away with the player, John Wooden Ward, the player of the year. None of their teams are in the finals. Nowhere near being in the finals. I shouldn't say that. Duke fought well, but they gave it up in the end. But how about that? The University of Michigan, at least I got one team playing in the finals. But I'll be honest, I don't know if I've ever seen a bracket get so screwed, twisted, just entwined in nonsense. I mean, think about this. The University of Michigan wins the Big Ten. they are pretty much, I felt, a lock sock pick coming out of the West Coast. But in the Midwest, nowhere did I even think that a team like Michigan State, who to me was probably the best team in the country early on, would be knocked out before they even make it to the Elite Eight. But so goes the brackets. And now we see a number one seed, Villanova, playing against a number one seed, Kentucky. Now, Villanova is going to win, and they're going to win by one way and one way only. University of Kentucky, they both are almost identical. They can both shoot the threes. They both defend the rebound and defend the boards with tenaciousness. And they believe in their coaching. These are senior-led teams. Number one thing that's got to be said about Villanova and Kansas University. Both of these teams have quality seniors who have led them into this game. No one and dones at neither one of these programs. No one and dones at any of the four teams. So what you're really seeing in this men's Final Four is senior leadership. You're seeing a team that's developed together. They've played together for the last few years, and now their experience is coming out in the tournament, and that's how it should be. But what do you say for a team, like Villanova, who shoots the three at 70+%? Okay, and they're going up against a Kansas team that doesn't quite shoot that way. They're more in the 58%. But they have the size, they have the range, they have the penetration in their guards. Both of them are led with guard play. And now you got them going up against each other for the semifinals in San Antonio. I mean, the Alamo it's going to be a shootout. Both of these teams average in the 75 to 80-point games. If they can hold their opponents below 78, they generally get a win. And then, of course, you got Loyola Chicago playing against Michigan, the 3 versus the 11. At no reason, at no rhyme, at no point in anybody's bracket do we see this coming. But that's what makes the Final Four such a special event. When you're in the playoff system that we have for football, you kind of know who's going to do what. And you don't have the mid-major, schools or the small Division II schools like who's the team that beat Michigan back, Appalachian State. You don't have the big Appalachian State teams coming up against the Big Ten, knocking them off to have the surprise win of the decade. You don't see that in football a lot. You see it in track. You might see it in baseball. But in terms of basketball and football, you really only see it in basketball. That's why we know where Gonzaga is today. Think about it. These are schools that don't even really have a major presence on the map, but people know and they've heard of Gonzaga for the last decade. They know and they've heard of VCU. They know and they've heard of Kansas State. Half the people can't tell you where Kansas State is located, but they've heard of it. And then you got teams like University of Maryland, Baltimore. And I'll be honest, when you look at it and you think about it, coming into this season, I had no clue where University of Maryland, Baltimore was located. I still don't have a clue where they're located. All I know is that they got a bunch of DC kids who shoot the ball very well and play sound defense. And like Gonzaga has done in the past years, we're going to hear more and more about the Loyolas, the Chicagos, the Nevadas, the UMBCs. We're going to hear more about them. University of Rhode Island. We're going to hear about these teams that for so many years have been in the shadow of the NCAA men's basketball Final Four. But they're now slowly itching their way closer and closer and closer. Texas Southern, the teams from the WAC, they got these sound players, and maybe when they were coming out of college, they had a grade, faux pas, or had they were a little undersized and they grew 2 or 3 inches after the years. But either way you look at it, this year's Final Four stands to be probably one of the most exciting that I think many people are going to be glued to their TV, and they're going to watch with a lot of excitement because come April 2nd, we're going to see a game no matter who it's being played against. It could be Loyola versus KU. It could be Loyola versus Villanova. It could be Michigan versus Villanova or Kansas. It doesn't make a difference. We've seen 4 teams that when you look at these four teams, they've played great ball down the stretch. And I think that's probably the number one thing you've got to do heading into the Final Four. And it's going to be probably a barn burner, but I don't see any type of a blowout unless, of course, Chicago, their shots start falling. I'm not even going to think about Villanova because last night Villanova's shots stopped falling for them, but it didn't make a difference against Texas Tech. Their defense clicked up a notch, and that took them to victory. So you're talking about a great, great Villanova program. Their coach has got to be one of the most outstanding coaches in the league, still hanging around. It's amazing because when you think about Villanova, you have to think about the streak. Right now, Philadelphia Flyers are playing well. The 76ers have made the playoffs for the first time in centuries. In centuries. I'm not talking about a couple of years. You can't even name the last time the Philadelphia 76ers. I think it's been something almost close to 20 years. They haven't been in the playoffs in ages. That's why they've had so many number one flops and busts and you know what's. But now they've got a team that finally made they finally made the playoffs, and it all goes back to February when the Philadelphia Eagles won the Super Bowl. They put a karma over the city of Philadelphia, and everyone that's in that city is riding it, and they're playing with great enthusiasm. Heard Jay on the phone earlier today on one of the networks, the head coach for Villanova, and you can hear the excitement. He said whatever it was that the Eagles have, they've given it to everybody else. And that city is booming right now. Look for Villanova. Of the four teams left, look for Villanova. If they get by Kansas, I think they'll take either one, Michigan or Loyola Chicago. I think they'll play to the level to take both teams down. You're listening to the Legends Community Show right here on the Power of Voices. I'm your host, Greg Bell. We've been talking NCAA bracket for the men's side. Now I want to run over and take a look at the women's bracket because, I don't know how I can say it I couldn't say it any clearer than what I did over the past 2 weeks. If you're seeded number one, more than likely you finished number one. And I don't know why that is, but that's the one bracket that a lot of people, you don't have to guess at this bracket. Most people pick Mississippi State, Louisville, Notre Dame, UConn. Those were the four at the beginning, and those are the four that are going to be heading to Columbus, Ohio on April the 1st. Playing for their championship. The semifinals game, of course, will be March the 30th. But Columbus, Ohio will have a great outing. It'll probably be one of the nicest Final Fours you've seen in years. Could Mississippi State do what they did a year ago, upsetting the powerhouse UConn? But UConn's got to get first by my alma mater, the Fighting Irish. Muffy McGraw has those teams. She's got that team playing inspired basketball right now. Let's say it that way. If you look at the Notre Dame Fighting Irish team this past year, a lot of key injuries, a lot of people that we weren't familiar with rose in the rankings and were able to carry this team into the Final Four. Of course, Lyle Thompson, their all ACC point guard, went down for the season. But I'll tell you what, Muffet did a great job of encouraging this team to pick up the slack. And I think that's something that all women's teams have got to think about when they're coming down the home stretch. Let's take a quick peek at the brackets where they sit right now, because a lot of people question whether it could be a close game or not. I think I told everybody right here on the Power of Voices a week ago, UConn's going to win by 20, 30 every single game. Let's look at how they progressed through their bracket. They beat St. Francis 140-52. Quinnipiac 71-46. Duke 72-59. And then South Carolina. Remember, South Carolina won the national championship last year. They beat them 94-65. Was there any question who was going to be advancing out of the East in Albany coming to the Final Four for women's? In the Midwest, Kansas City, Mississippi State, the team that upset UConn last year to end their undefeated season. And remember, they haven't lost now since that championship game, the Final Four of a year ago to Mississippi State. Now they get a chance to play Mississippi State again in the Final Four in the semifinals if they beat Notre Dame, in the championship. So you got to think right now at the top of your at the top of that quarter panel of that right side of your brain, Mississippi State remembers what they did last year to UConn. And UConn's over here thinking that's our inspiration. That's why they're going to probably beat, and I hate to say this for my Lady Fighting Irishes, but they're probably going to win by 20 points the way they beat y'all during the season as it was. And I see UConn playing against Mississippi State in the finals. And don't get me wrong, Louisville could shock everybody, and Louisville could come up, beat Mississippi State, but I doubt it. Mississippi State, of course, got to this round beating UCLA 89-73. Before that, they put a spanking on North Carolina State 71-57, and Oklahoma State 71-56, and of course McNeese State 95-50. So their closest game was last week against University of California, Los Angeles. But, and this is a real big but, is what happens if UConn gets to the finals with Mississippi State, as I'm predicting. Two number ones in their own respected division. And Irish fans, don't get upset with me. I love the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame. I cheer for Muffin's team every single time. But this is just kind of becoming realistic. UConn has got everyone's number. They are playing inspired basketball right now from a standpoint of a team that does not want to lose. And coming into this game, Notre Dame's dropped 3 games coming in. I believe their record right now sits at 26-3. Same with Louisville. Same with Mississippi State. All of them have dropped a handful of games. They can count it on, one set of fingers on one hand. But UConn can't count any losses. They play night in, night out. I mean, that's just Gino's got this team playing on a high level, probably because they lost the way they lost last year to Mississippi State. And then, of course, to see South Carolina go on to win the national championship, that didn't do anything but light the fire to where they're coming this year. And it's without a doubt in my mind. I think I said this 2 weeks ago, and I said it last week, and I'll say it again this week. If your money is good, your money's going to UConn. If you got long money and you want to take the big risk, then you're going to pick Mississippi State. I don't think Louisville or Notre Dame will be able to get by UConn, or Louisville will be able to get by Mississippi State. Mississippi State has one thing going on their shoulder that they can lean off, or they can lean on, I should say, and that's that they have beaten UConn on the biggest and the brightest stage before, of course, that being last year. But it's like I said, going in, if you're a bracket beater, the women's bracket isn't the one you're going to play, because every team falls in line and they do exactly what we thought they would do. North Carolina State was the number 4 seed. They advanced, and then, of course, they lost to Mississippi State. I mean, you go back and you look at who lost to who. If you look at most of the brackets, someone in the top 5 or 6 lost to the number 1, and all 4 of the number 1s advanced to be in the Final Four. So that is what is called the women's bracket. And like I said, if you're a betting man, you'll take that bet. But I'm not that big of a bettor. That's why I told everyone 2 weeks ago, it is what it is. It's almost 100% sure that the brackets, the way they put them in place, you're going to see the women in the finals just like they expect. A lot of things going on in the world of sports. Of course, you're listening to the Power of Voices radio right here, powerofvoices.com. A lot going on in the basketball world. I want to know what you think about the Lakers right now. Of course, if you haven't heard, LiAngelo Ball balling in the NBA. Tell me what that means to you guys. The Lakers, of course, they're not balling right now. 5th time in the last 5 years eliminated from making the playoffs. Equation set. So Lonzo Ball didn't really become that big of a factor for the Lakers today. The younger Ball, LiAngelo, I should call him, not LiAnthony, but LiAngelo. Of course, he's been playing abroad with his younger brother, and he just declared today that he's going into this year's NBA draft. What do you think about that? I got a question for a lot of the naysayers. Now, we talked about this in different facets, but when you start talking about the NC2A right now, you're talking about a conference that really creates revenue for themselves more than anyone, but they align the basketball, the NC2A football playoffs, all the collegiate playoffs run through the NC2A. Well, one of the biggest questions going on in college football and basketball right now is how do we maintain these players, get them to stay where they're at, be loyal to the school, be loyal to the cause. But have you seen what's in the paper? And if you follow in the NC2A, what's the biggest story right now in the NC2A? Biggest story, of course, is Sister Jean. And of course, Sister Jean came up with a motto: worship, work, and win. Sweet motto. But she just allowed the university to trademark it. So now the university is exploiting the sister the way they've been exploiting the brothers for years. Worship, work, and win. Now, I got to ask everybody, we've been talking about this for the past 6 months about how much the NC2A exploits these young kids. They need to have a stipend. They need to get a piece of the action, a piece of the royalty. Well, Sister Jean ain't getting a piece of the royalty, which is pretty obvious. But is that an exploitation as well? Because guess what? The University of Chicago, the Loyola Chicago, they're getting ready to cash in on it. She is the biggest story right now in the NC2A. Her prayer over her team has led them to the Final Four since the last time. And this is the most amazing thing, I think, when you start thinking about it. They hung a banner back in '63 at Loyola Chicago, NC2A champions. And she thinks that this is the year they could actually hang another banner. It's been something like 45 years? I can't give you the exact, it's 45 or 55. It's been a long time since the University of Loyola Chicago has ever hung a banner. But now, with worship, work, and win, and the shirts are going everywhere. Her face is being thrown out across America, and she is touched by an angel, Sister Jean. But at the same time, you got to wonder, are they exploiting that opportunity? Because why is it that the schools and the NC2As are the only ones that can make money off of just something as simple as a phrase, as an image? And I'm saying this for one small reason. If today a young man in college came up with a slogan, hit it, quit it, and win it, or whatever, come up with something just catchy that apparel companies love it, this kid cannot trademark that phrase. And that's the hypocrisy in the whole elements of what's called college sports. If I were an everyday student and I had a keen eye for opportunities and I came out tomorrow with a great t-shirt line and I'm a football player at the University of Notre Dame, do you know that I would lose my eligibility to play football if I decided to profit off my company? So basically, it's almost to the point where the NC2A is basically saying to young men and women, you have no right to be an entrepreneur, none whatsoever. All you have is the opportunity to go to school and nothing else. And I'm trying to figure out, why is it that athletes are always singled out in that way? See, if I was an everyday student, no scholarship money, and I came across an opportunity, they would be more important that I'm paying for my college education. They wouldn't say, we don't want you to become an entrepreneur. They would say, good for you. I mean, look at Mark Zuckerberg. He was in college when Facebook was created and he stole the concept. The guys who came up with it, the twins who came up with it, no one thought about telling them, you know what, we're getting ready to kick you off the rowing team. Nothing was ever said. But as soon as it becomes a situation where somebody can make profit off of the fact that they created something or have something that other people want, oh my God, here comes Big Brother NC2A, and they basically say, can't do it. And I just want to know what many people think about that. Is it something that's fair? Is it something that's right? Is this something you think should be done? Or is the purpose of college in the first place to teach, educate, and strengthen young minds? The stronger they make these young minds, the more likely that kid won't fail in the end. But when you pull them back, especially when you're talking about an athlete, and sometimes many of these guys are guys who are, they're not the stars of the team. They just happen to be sitting on the bench. And their life is going to start at the end of his college career. And all of a sudden, he's got to go out and find a job with no internship, no introductions, no networking, hasn't done half of the preparation necessary to go out into the world. So that was just something that jumped out in my mind when I saw the Sister Jean gave Loyola Chicago the right to trademark her slogan in her face. It just blows me by. It just blows me away. I want to know what a lot of people got to think about OJB. Odell Beckham Jr., possibly a Ram? Did I hear something like that? Well, the owner meetings are going on in Orlando right now, and that's got to be probably the craziest thing you ever seen. 32 billionaires basically swinging their chains saying, I got the biggest one. What's the purpose of an owner's meeting when you got a competition meeting, you got a rules and regulations department? They got so many different departments. This is just an opportunity for owners to get together and say, oh, aren't we rich? We got the best product on the street. But either way, the owners' meetings are going on down in Orlando. And, of course, the big question on a lot of people's mind is Odell Beckham Jr., probably the most highly sought-out free agent. Not a free agent really quite yet. He's got another year left on his New York Giants contract. But the word on the street is Odell says he wants to be the highest paid player, and he's willing to sit out, willing not to be a no-show. And in lieu of what happened about 2 weeks ago on his Twitter and Instagram, if you haven't seen it, go online, take a look. Shows OBJ over in France or the UK or somewhere in foreign country. A lot of powder, a lot of pot, a lot of drugs in one room, and he happened to be in that room enjoying himself. Now he's denied any use of any of the products. I'm sure the NFL made him immediately come home, take a blood test. But in the long and the short of it is, OBJ makes another mistake. And that becomes probably the underlining question that the New York Giants have. Do they got someone who's really passionate about what he does? And remember, we know his talent. This kid basically rewrote the catching manual. It used to be a time when I was in the league, they told you never reach for a ball with one hand. You always want to stretch for it with two to get two hands on the ball. But OBJ, 5 years ago when he came into the league, 4 years ago, this will be year 5, he made it an art to catch the ball with one hand. And he did it so effortlessly. He just basically caught any ball he could catch with one hand. He caught it with one. It was no big deal. He's gone out and had amazing years. Of course, the last 2 years have been injury-laden, not to his fault. I mean, some of them he had no control over. But at the same time, the New York Giants, of course, right now have got to be thinking rebuild. They got Eli Manning sitting there. They're going to stick with him, it sounds like, for the next 2 years, allow him to play out his contract. But in doing so, how are they preparing for the future? And when I say preparing for the future, they're right now sitting in that 6th position with an opportunity to move down, get themselves in position for one of these 3, what many people are calling franchise quarterbacks. Now, here's the funny thing about it. Think back to the 1983 draft when you had Kelly Marino, Blackledge, God, who was the other guy? Mark Ripken was in that draft, and so was Marino, Kelly, Blackledge, Elway. So think back to that draft where you got 5 truly franchise players. And now, of course, they're really only talking about the 2 Joshes and Sam Donaldson. But don't forget, there are other quarterbacks that are quality quarterbacks in this draft, and there might even be a Tom Brady in here without anyone thinking about it. I mean, let's remember that the GOAT was drafted in the 5th round. He wasn't the first rounder. And to this day, he's been making everybody pay for the fact that they waited 5 rounds to pick him. So there could be a GOAT lying in the wait. But right now, the Jets are concerned. They're sitting at the 3 position thinking, do we need to go down one more to make sure we get one of our top 2, potentially 3 players? And, of course, the number 1 player in the draft itself, Saquon Barkley, is sitting there, who also the Giants have a high need for as well. So the Giants are sitting there, and they've already let Jason Pierre-Paul go. He's gone. They're beginning their rebuilding section. And in that session, it's got to be, you're looking at having the most dominant, most flamboyant, most articulate wide receivers, most marketable wide receivers, without a doubt, wanting to be the highest paid player, not highest paid wide receiver, but he wants to be the highest paid player. And that's going to probably be his downfall if he sticks with that. Last year he didn't attend any of the training camps. Didn't even show up for a lot of the voluntary OTAs. A lot of people has a problem with that. But at the same time, I have to say to you, I don't have a problem with a guy missing OTAs, especially when it says V in front of it, voluntary. The mandatory ones, I understand. We all had to do those mini camps. But not everybody was a seasonal workout guy and lived around the franchise and did everything at the team facility. I wasn't one of those guys. I left, went back to my home in New York when I was playing in the Rams. It wasn't until my 2nd, 3rd year being caught in the snow in Buffalo, I said, the hell with this. I can live in sun all day long, every day. So I said, let's move. But OBJ is sitting in a position, he's a Louisiana kid. He likes traveling. Let's face it, football isn't his highest employer. He gets more money from Head and Shoulders than he's getting from his football contract, not to mention all the other endorsements that he have in his arsenal right now. I think they said he makes somewhere close to $60-70 million from his marketing opportunities. Well, the NFL's got to remember that. And at the same time, Odell has to remember that what butters his bread is his game. And he's been out of that game for almost a year and a quarter now because of injury. And that plays a little bit of piece of everything. I mean, your teammates, if he were to walk in, get the highest paid contract after not playing for the last year and a half, and by chance he gets hurt within the next, say, 3 to 4 games, going to be a lot of pissed off players on that team that says, hey, how did he deserve it and I haven't deserved it, and I've been performing every game, week in, week out. You got to take in the fact the injuries. You got to take in the fact that this is going to be a rebuilding team. And with it said, with the fact that they're already talking about it's a rebuilding team, I can see Pat Schumer, the New York Giants, basically saying, we're listening to all offers. If somebody comes up and says, hey, we want Odell Beckham, and of course, I hate to say it, one of the teams that's talking to him most is our Los Angeles Rams, where he could make a great addition to an offense that has the running game down pat. Of course, Sammy Watson, he leaves, heads out of town. That was a big blow from where I sit. I think Sammy Watkins could be a big-time player. I think he'd be a big-time receiver in the National Football League, being surrounded and being in the right system. He was just starting to learn in our system. We're heading for about 7 weeks. He was starting to come on. I think a full off season, a full season with the Rams. Sammy was a potential 100-catch guy. He catches the ball with his hands. He's a hands guy. And that's the same thing Odell Beckham is. So it doesn't shock me that Sean McVay is out talking about, nobody is safe during the offseason. Everything is everything. It's all on the table. And so Rams being interested in OBJ is a blessing for the Ram fans. If y'all are big Ram fans, this could be an icebreaker. I mean, this is the hammer that strikes the cube. And he could shatter what we think we have and make us into something completely different, because he demands double coverage when he walks out on the field. Very few cornerbacks in the NFL are going to cover him man to man. That just opens up other avenues from Todd Gurley being able to run off tackle to inside the tackles. It just widens the field for a running back. So I'm sitting here, I'm excited. I hope it happens because on the other side of the ball, on the defensive side of the ball, they're making it happen. Now, if you haven't heard, of course, Ndamukong Suh came out to L.A. He's been visiting every team from Detroit, not Detroit, but St. Louis. St. Louis. What is wrong with me today? I'm blowing it here. Not St. Louis, but the New Orleans Saints. He visited the Saints. Of course, the Dolphins let him go. Looked at Atlanta. He's been looking for the right team, and it seems like he found it. And he found it at a hell of a good price. I have to give you that. He went from $18 million to $14 million, and he found himself right down here in Agora with the Los Angeles Rams. He'll be playing next to Aaron Donald. And here's the thing. The Rams have a strong defensive unit. Even with the loss of Ogletree, their number one tackler traded and the number two tackler traded. What Ndamukong Suh does for the Rams is he basically contains the middle of the defensive front. He gives Aaron Donald a chance to basically become even more demanding, even more a focus on people's outside rush and who's going to block him. With the strength that Suh puts in the middle of the game, the two tackles that we'll be putting in our 3-4, they should run wild. Not only should they be running wild, the outside backers should be blitzing a lot this year. I mean, I see this defense, and Wade Phillips, he's got to be smiling from ear to ear. You know, as long as they continue to progress, pick youthful young legs that can run. That's probably the only position I'm really concerned. Nothing, I don't want to talk about Talib Khalib or Marcus Peters. I think Marcus is a great young talent, but Talib, he's got years there. And you got to be a quick and agile and fluent guy to play in the defensive back position in the NFL now. With the taller, lankier wide receivers, these 6-foot corners, they're not going to make a lot of. They're not going to stay in the game a long time. I was unfortunate for us. We had already pulled the trigger on Peterson and on Khalid because I would have loved to see Richard Sherman come here. Even though Richard is not a barn burner, he can't run with the best of them. The best of them can't out-jump him. He's got the arm strength. He knows how to play the position, and he's a 6'3" defensive back. And, yeah, you say to yourself, well, does 2 inches matter? Yes, it does. It truly does in the game of football, especially when your receivers are 6'5", 6'6", like the former Calvin Johnson and like some of the receivers that you see in the NFL today. They're big boys. And it's just amazing when they're contorting and twisting their bodies to make the kind of catches that were routine catches for Jerry Rice back in the day. Like I said, the game has evolved where they're bigger, they're faster, they're more agile. And in essence, guys, and this is the truth of the matter, that most guys my age don't like saying, they're in better shape. They are prepared with, they've eaten better. Their diets are so much more refined than ours was. These guys are leaner, they're bigger, they're stronger, faster. And that happens. There's going to be a time before I die, which hopefully is going to give me another 30, before we see a guy run a 4.0, a 4 flat 40. I see that coming. Usain Bolt swears he can run a 3.9, but we haven't put a gun on him yet. But he's a track guy. And there's going to be a football player that goes to the combine, and he's going to blow out a 4.09 or 4.01. I know it's going to happen in my lifetime, if not in the next 5 years. Because of the way they're training during the off seasons, their bodies are well tuned. They're ready to go as soon as the season starts. And that's probably why the biggest argument that I know has got to be brought up down at the Orlando owner meetings is the fact that, the owners are trying to add 2 more preseason games, and the players are trying to get rid of 2 preseason games because you don't need 4 games to get yourself prepared when these guys have been in preparation all season long. I mean, now that they're getting paid the $10 and the $20 million, most of these guys make home in that locker room during the offseason. Their contract states that they have to train, lift, and work out. So it's a year-round job where when I played the game and we made $100,000, you were happy to see me from August to January. And if you saw me from January to February, we were winning playoff money. And that's good money to win. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens with OBJ. It's going to be interesting to see what the owners are talking about. If you haven't heard, as I said earlier, Orlando, Florida, the owners are having their owners meeting, 32 billionaires sitting around talking about how rich we are and how nice it is. But more importantly, there's a lot of trades being made while they're down there in Orlando. The coaches are down there. We've talked about it. Sue joins the Los Angeles Rams. Of course, so much is being talked about OBJ, Odell Beckham Jr., of course, the possibility that the Giants are going to try and move down, might pick up a first or second round here, getting rid of OBJ because his demands is to be the highest paid player in the league. I'm not sure he deserves that today, but 2 years ago, if they had renegotiated that contract, he probably could have been asking for a lot more. But coming off an injured year that saw him do very little before he got injured, and he was already coming off an injured year before that. So it's going to be interesting to see what the owners decide to do, or I shouldn't say what the mayor, the Mara family is planning on doing with OBJ, because at some point the Maras are going to just say, we don't need the antics. We just want to play and win football games. And that's something that OBJ hasn't been doing for them the last year and a half. You're listening to the Legends Community Show right here on the powerofvoices.com. Of course, if you're just tuning in, I'm your host, Greg Bell, former Rams, former Raider, running back. And here's that, I don't know how I want to say this out of respect to the guy, but Tyrone Boykin, the backup quarterback to Russell Wilson up in Seattle. Here's a backup quarterback making about $7 million a year. Been in the league for about 5 years. And I don't want to point my finger just at him. And I'm not going to point my finger just at him, just so all you guys know. But, of course, if you haven't heard, Boykin was arrested earlier in the week, or last week, I should say, on domestic violence charges. And Seattle basically has cut the cord with him. I doubt if anybody decides to touch him over the next until his trial comes up and he's either found not guilty or, they find something that doesn't point the finger at him as it's pointing to him right now. But as the state stands right now in wake of what happened, Boykin will be looking for a new job. And to be honest, Seattle was a perfect spot for the guy. You almost want to look at him and say, what are you thinking? I mean, I hate to say it like this, but, we've been talking about domestic violence now towards women for a better part of 3 to 4, 5 years now. We've talked about it for over 100 years. But in terms of the National Football League and their stance on it and where it's going to put you, Boykin was an outstanding quarterback at TCU, native of Dallas, and it's just sad, that we're still talking about something that is really about your emotions taking over and being able to control your own emotions. And I don't want to hear the thing that, she threw something at me or she hit me with this or she grabbed me and scratched me. In the long run of the whole session here that we're going to talk about, it just becomes a man doesn't need to put his hands on a woman. And if you're caught in that situation, you basically put yourself in a no-win situation. And Boykin's on in defense of what he did. I can't even tell you guys. I don't know if I could even defense this guy because in the long run, he broke her jaw. I mean, it just makes no sense. Of course, at his home in Mansfield, Texas, and it's going to be hard for him to get another job. And I don't mean that literally from a standpoint, a job in the National Football League. I'll be honest, Canada don't want you either right now. Nobody wants someone who's abusing others. And then in his defense, you're supposed to be innocent until proven guilty. But the fact that you broke a woman's jaw and you tried to strangle her first, I mean, the evidence speaks for itself. And this isn't going to be, where money can get you cleared like OJ. Those days ain't coming anytime soon. And talking about OJ, I want to, before I get out of here, I got a 5 cents worth of speak. I got to talk about the special. And if you didn't see the special, see the special. You'll be disgusted with it as much as I was. But, Boykin's going to learn the hard lesson that Ray Rice is learning. There's so many NFL ball players, and hopefully more ball players will understand. When you take a position to play in the National Football League, the spotlight hits you. And it's a light that you have asked to be put on you. I tell people all the time, I'd never change anything in my career, not the injuries, not the fame, not the low points, the high points, because every single day of my life of that dream, I was bettering myself as an individual. And I didn't want anything that would tear away from that light being shone on somebody else other than the person who wanted it. And I didn't, and like most players, remember, there's only 1,500 active players, 1,800 total a year. And that's a small, minute, very small minority community. And the light is going to shine on all 15 to 1,800 guys as long as you don on the National Football League jersey. And, I hate to say it, but it almost brings out that comment that Stan Lee said, with great power comes great responsibility. Is that the Spider-Man trilogy? With great powers comes great responsibility. And that's basically what comes when you don on the NFL, NBA jersey. You've asked the light to be shone on you. And the shining, they're going to shine that light directly on you. So when you do good, it's going to be magnified. But when you do bad, it's going to be extremely magnified. And in the case of Tyrone Boykin, a career that probably never got a chance to get off the ground will be gone for good now. Guys, you're listening to the Legends Community Show here on thepowervoices.com. I'm your host each and every week. Of course, my name is Greg Bell. Of course, early in the show, we've been talking a lot about the brackets. Want to touch base on the brackets before we get out of here one last time. If you're just tuning in, of course, the Final Four is set in Albuquerque. Actually, the Alamo in San Antonio. I love saying Albuquerque. That just sounds so good. But no, it's San Antonio, Texas this year, not the Albuquerque. And the men's final stands to be probably one of the most fascinating Final Fours that I think we've seen in numerous years. That we talked about it earlier in the show that Loyola Chicago, these are 4 teams, Loyola Chicago, Villanova, University of Kentucky, and University of Michigan. The one thing that's missing out of all of these 4 teams is the fabulous freshmen. No freshman All-Americans on any of these 4 teams, and that's probably why we see what we see. As I told people earlier in the show, these are senior-led teams. All of them have been around. They've gone through the ups and downs. They've learned how to play in the tournament. If you want to say something negative about Kentucky, they had Carter Jr. and they had Bagley. Neither one of those guys seemed to step to the forefront. Carter did a great job in the second half, coming on, probably scored all of his 20-some-odd points in the second half with 3 fouls the entire second half before he fouled out before the extra period. But when you start talking about University of Kentucky, another senior-led guard team. So when you got seniors who have been around for that duration, that's 4 years, some 5. They understand the magnitude of urgency that goes into a Final Four, and they understand win or go home. And that's the bottom line. And sometimes they can alter or change and adapt their game to the way that the play is going. And I think you will see that come April 1st. April 1st or 31st, I should say March 31st in San Antonio, you're going to see a Loyola Chicago team take on Villanova. And I should not Villanova, but they're going to be taking on Michigan. and Villanova will be taking on Kansas. Both of these teams are pretty much the same. You know, if you look at Villanova and Kansas, you're talking about guard-led teams who can hit the three. And they hit it at a high rate, and they pound the boards. But what you see is a good defensive team in both of them. They're so well-rounded, it's going to be amazing when that game takes shape. And then, of course, Loyola Chicago, they live and they'll die by the three. Michigan is just sound all the way around. The Big Ten champs come into the Final Four after putting away a Florida State team that, you know, I don't know what I should say about Florida State. You know, we didn't talk about the Elite Eight that much, but, you know, the coach for Florida State, you know, as players make mistakes, so do coaches. Should he have made a foul? Should they have called a timeout? Without a doubt. Until the last tick off, or what I think they say is .003, that's how long it takes to shoot one shot. You can get a shot off in .003. You got to play through the whistle. When it's 11 seconds on the game and you're down by 4, you still got a shot at winning. And I think he will learn from his mistakes as the players will learn from the mistakes that they had. No, they didn't lose it because he didn't foul. He didn't call for a player to foul. That's not what lost the game for Florida State. Florida State lost the game because they just basically got outplayed by Michigan, period. And I'm happy with that because Michigan was in my initial brackets. I had Michigan, I had Virginia, I had Villanova, and, of course, I had Michigan State coming out of the Midwest. And, of course, right now that's Kansas. But I got one bracket beater in there, and Michigan's, you know, I can't win the bracket by any means. But I think my bracket is probably as good as anybody else's when you think about it. I mean, we all put these brackets together 3 weeks ago on March 14th, March 13th. Excuse me. And we tried to, you know, you try and guess. But the one thing about the men's bracket that I said 3 weeks ago, back on the 13th, 14th, you got to flip a coin when it gets down to some of them. The odds are so these odd bettors, they're baiting you into picking Villanova or Texas Tech over Villanova, or Loyola Chicago to beat Buffalo, or in their case to beat Tennessee. No one, that was a flip of a coin. Nobody predicted that, but they've become part of that, what I call hysteria. You know, as a kid growing up in Indiana and Ohio, there was a thing they call Hoosier hysteria. And this is NC2A hysteria. They bait you into picking and flipping the coin and looking for the upset. And this isn't the women's bracket. You know, we talked about that earlier in the show. The women's bracket is what I said 3 weeks ago. Number ones versus number ones. They know the women's game. It's hard for an unseeded women's team to do what University of Maryland, Baltimore did to Virginia. It's so hard for a 16 to beat a 1. You don't see it happening. Matter of fact, I don't think it's ever happened before this year in the men's bracket, let alone talk about the women's bracket. So we're in one of those situations. It is a crazy, crazy bracket. Who do you think will come out on the top? Will Loyola Chicago continue to be the angel team with Sister Jean and her motto, worship, work, and win? That's the new model that's been trademarked by Sister Jean. How big of a celebrity has she become? I mean, I hate to say this, but if they were to go on and win a Final Four, hang a banner in Loyola Chicago Stadium next to their 1963 banner, could you see a movie like Rudy being made of Sister Jean? I was joking with somebody telling them this could be a bigger movie than Rudy was for the University of Notre Dame. Sister Jean, could you imagine showing her as a child growing up, dedicating herself to Christ, but she had one motto that she lived by: worship, work, and win. Man, she's trademarked her motto. The NC2A and Loyola Chicago getting ready to make money off of her image and her slogan. And I told people, of course, that's where the hypocrisy starts. It's at its finest point. The NC2A, who has made billions off of the back of millions of young athletes, just another opportunity for them to make more money off of the Final Four darling of an angel, Sister Jean. Sister Jean turns over her trademark opportunities to Lola. Of course, Sister Jean don't care. She in her 90s. She in a wheelchair. She's sitting around just chilling all day long. And now she's the darling of the NC2A Final Four. She will be front center court, behind the table with protection. Everybody will know who Sister Jean is after April the 2nd. Of course, April 1st will be the women's Final Four. I've talked about it. We talked about it earlier. My pick is going to go with UConn. I don't know how you can bet against UConn right now. They are, of course, going in another 30-plus-0 season. All wins, no defeats. And they just continue to roll. Talked about the fact that the Rams signed Ndamukong Suh. If you're joining late, the Rams increased their viability to win the NFC next year. I think what the Rams are doing from an offseason standpoint really proves one of the points that I've always said. You win with defense, you glamorize with offense. And the Rams have taken a hard line stance is that we're going to improve our defense. We've got an offense that we can win with, but we have to dominate on the defensive side of the ball. They're signing Ndamukong Suh after letting Ogletree go, their number one tackler, and the fact that they've gone out getting Marcus Peters, as well as Talib Khalib, and give them a really sound leadership. Those are two guys who have been captains on their respective teams. Suh coming from Miami, Khalib coming from Denver. And the nice thing for Khalib is he's worked with Wade Wilson before, so the Rams should be up and moving fairly quick from a defensive back standpoint, since Khalib has worked with Wade Phillips many years when they were with the Broncos, where they won a Super Bowl. So look for proud. These are just great moves if you're a Ram fan. Also, we talked about earlier in the show, OBJ, Odell Beckham Jr., possibility he too could be donning on the blue and gold of the Los Angeles Rams. And I'm going to tell you, if the Rams go out and make that sign, it's going to tell me a lot. Sean McVay, I got to believe he's in there with the management team, with Kroenke, with Dimoff, with Les Snead Jr. These guys have got to be smiling because they're doing something that most people aren't doing, and they're working to I don't want to say corral, but to bring that millennium athlete together. And I think this is speaking volumes when you start looking at all the teams that they're letting these guys walk away, and you look at the management team. We talked about the Rams front office being one of the youngest front offices around, with Sean McVay, their head coach, who has to have a lot of input on who he wants to coach. And then you got Les Snead. He's in his mid to late 30s, early 40s. The same with Kevin Dimoff. These are young guys. They're millenniums themselves. They're on the cutting edge of being a millennium, but they're towards the tail end of that millennium as it is themselves. And they're creating a millennium team here for the Los Angeles Rams. And I'm just saying, from a standpoint of a Ram player looking in, you got to love these moves, because sometimes the best want to play with the best. And yes, some people are sitting out there saying, well, OBJ could be a head case. Ndamukong Suh is a head case. Guys, it takes a millennium to manage a millennium. I can't tell you I know how to go in and talk and work with these young men. I'm not of their millennium. I'm not a techie. I'm not a socialite. These are things that Sean McVay and Kevin and Les, they're part of that millennium. So when you start looking at teams, it's so much that you got to look at what they're trying to do. And all I can say right now for the Los Angeles Rams, they are attacking this offseason with veracity and an attitude that we are definitely going to get better at the areas that we're weakest at. And before I go, one other thing I wanted to make sure everybody gets a good laugh at. The Lakers, I got to tell you, the Clippers are probably going to make the playoffs. The Lakers were eliminated. And I hate to put the onus on the Lakers, but we thought balling in the NBA meant, getting Lonzo Ball. I'd love to hear what LeVar is saying right now that the Lakers, I'm sure he'll point blame at the coaches and this and that, but those players are the ones, the reason why they're not playing to the level that they could be. It's not a bad ball club, but they're just not putting the ball in the hoop at the kind of rate that they have to bring this team back to Showtime. And as I talked about it earlier as well, LiAngelo Ball has decided to give up his foreign basketball league. He's averaging 15 points, played in about 10 games so far. Not bad, but not great. But he plans to enter the 2018 NBA draft. So there's a lot going on in sports, a lot that we have to talk about. More coming up next week, guys. Look, you've been listening to the Legends Community Show right here on the Power of Voices. Every weekend, week out, we're here to talk sports and have a lot of fun otherwise. Until we talk next week, guys, this is Greg Bell, powerofvoices.com. Check us out right here on thepowerofvoices.com. Bye-bye.